What's that sound? It's For Amusement Only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast.
Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. Before I get into talk about multi-races, I wanted to remind everybody that I'll be heading to the Texas Pinball Festival in Frisco, Texas, March 22nd through the 24th of 2019. I'll be bringing the multi-bingo with me and be talking about a new project, so I'm very excited for that. Well, I've been working on multi-races for the past couple weeks, and I've been wiring. All of the switches are wired, including the knockoff switch. Interestingly, Victory Derby could be put in either replay mode or payoff mode. I find this intriguing because Victory Derby is known as the payout version of Victory Special, which was the replay version. But it appears that what they did is they took Victory Special, pushed a new glass into it, and put in the payout mechanism and associated hardware on the front door. Other than that, it's the same game, including the knockoff and the projection credit unit. It's pretty fascinating and surprising. So every switch in the game is now wired, and I began wiring the coils and lamps. There are just enough lamps that I can't wire them on one bank of a PD16 driver board. The driver board that I use is split up into 16 drivers, 8 of which are on one bank and can be 1 voltage. The other 8 are on a second bank and are a second voltage. So I push through 5 volts on one of the banks, and that lights the lamps. Because the drivers have to be DC, my choices are either put in a relay for each lamp and then run it at 6 volts AC, run a bunch of them as GI, or run them at 5 volts, which is what I've done. I could also get a 6 volt DC power supply, but why would I want to do that? So I have 9 lamps total. There's 5 that run straight up the middle of the playfield, and then 1 for each bumper. And the bumper lights light when the appropriate bumper is hit in sequence. So A lights, and if A is lit and you hit B, then B will light. But if A is lit and not B and you hit C, C doesn't light, for example. The playfield lamps, the ones that run straight up the middle, on later games are GI. On earlier games, however, they're used to indicate a feature on the playfield. So I decided to make them controlled, and with this I can make eye-searing attract mode, or I can use it to perfectly replicate those games, and that's what I'll do. The other thing that I have left to do is wiring in the proximity sensors. Now, I have space. I believe I have another 8 switch handlers that I can wire in for the proximity sensors and anything else extra which I might need. I remember with the multi-bingo, I thought I was done several times and ended up extending my switch handling quite a bit after I began actually wiring the playfield. So we'll see if that is the case this time. You know, adding things like the drawer, for example, added a whole bunch of switches into the game. But I believe at this time I will be pretty well served by the 3 switch handlers that I have right now. But because there's 1 additional lamp that I can't wire into a bank of 8, I need to get a second driver board. I have the same problem with coils. Now coils, I had mentioned that there's only a very few of them, but I decided to make this as authentic sounding as possible. So here's what I've done. I am going to use the 400-to-1 unit, which is a single coil, but it has a very unique sound because of the ratcheting action of the gearing. It's like a multi-phase stepper, and all of the steps, there are no points. There are no contact points on the steps themselves. So instead of a spider that's turning and making contact with multiple rivets, instead there are arms which are sticking out of the various gears, and they will hit switch stacks as they turn. It's a pretty clever little design. The schematics call out, for example, 20-to-1, so every 20 turns, this switch will close, or 400 to 1. Every 400 turns, this switch will close. And my code, replicates that appropriately. So right now what I'm doing is wiring up the AC circuits. And even though the game is DC driven, it's computer controlled, I have to wire up AC for certain things. For example, motors. Motors in the game, I'm using the original motors, and they're AC. You can't run them with DC because DC won't allow the motor to turn. It'll just buzz and then, eventually melt, catch fire, that kind of thing. Blow a fuse, probably. So I have to run AC for those. And I was assuming, naively, that the control unit was going to be 120 volts. So I'd be able to run the control unit and the shutter, utilizing the same 120 volt line. But as it turns out, the shutter motor is 120 volts, which in the bingos they switched to 50 volts for the shutter motor. But the control unit is 50 volts, and they switched to 120 volts later on in the One Ball's lives. And for the bingos, they're all 120 volts, so just can't win. So I had to install a transformer in order to create the 50 volts AC that I need, and I'm driving it with a 50 volt DC relay. Things are just insane. So I'm having to run wires back and forth through the game in order to make this happen. Now, luckily, under the playfield, there is a ball return shelf. It's very similar to the bingos in that way. The bingos are a little more engineered, I would say. They added a metal bracket at the back of the playfield that prevents the ball from flying out of the back of the game, especially if someone were to lift the game as the ball is being returned. So in this, there's just a board that it runs down. There's nothing to stop it. I mean, it can fly down that board and hit something at full strength, but there's only one ball, so there's less chance of collision. There's less chance of other things breaking. It's a design that works, and some of the early bingos used a very similar design to this. Underneath that return board, there's just empty space. So thankfully, I've been able to mount things like the big power switch inside the game, and a variety of cabling can run through there. There's a lot of cabling in here. And I can run my 120 volt circuits back to the power strip that's inside, and get everything to run that way. So one of the challenges I've had is trying to make everything modular, because of course I want to be able to disassemble the game so that I can move it easily. But in making it modular, I have to make certain compromises. For example, I'm ending up having to use more wire than I would if I wasn't making it modular, because I'm wiring to Jones plugs. And the Jones plugs themselves are also a compromise, because I didn't have one that's the correct size that was intact for the size Jones plug that I was planning to use, which is 10 by 2 or 20 positions. So I ended up having to use one of the older style Jones plugs with a newer style top. You might ask why I did that and didn't use the older style top. Well, part of it is the solder that was used. It is very old and very hard, and it's very difficult to heat. So I feel like I've almost toasted my soldering gun doing the desoldering that's needed for this project. But on the newer bingo style Jones plugs, it's much easier to desolder the male plugs. So again, I'm very close. I just have a bit of wiring left to do, mostly coil related. I have the relays that I'm planning to use wired up for commons. I just have to do the switched part, and then run a few extra wires to handle my switched 120 volts and my switched 50 volt AC. And then I should be ready to check all the connections and then turn it on and hope everything doesn't explode. we'll see. I already have a computer that's imaged, and it's ready to go. And I will be able to update the code instantly and see what the heck happens. Hopefully something good. I don't have any graphics in place, so I'm going to need to kind of trick the graphical routine into loading. Shouldn't be too hard, and I'll be able to test my work with the switches and the coils, at least this way. So I'm looking forward to that day, which should be soon. Maybe this weekend, depending on if I get time to work on it between now and then. But I'll be happy to get that rolling. Once I have that going, I'm going to switch back to RoboFrenzy and continue troubleshooting that. I don't think I mentioned in the past couple episodes, but the circuits that I do have working in RoboFrenzy have been incredibly satisfying. Being able to hit the score relays, for example, and watch the score reels move as they hit number 9, and then hitting the score relay again, watching it increment to 10, is pretty awesome. It's a good feeling to have that wired up. And I've certainly done that on a smaller scale, fixing games where parts have been cut out and I've replaced them. But it's not quite the same as doing it from scratch. So RoboFrenzy has been very rewarding thus far, and hopefully it'll continue to be so. As I mentioned, I need to get a couple of the steppers drilled and the contacts wired in on the male side of the disc, the spider side, I guess you'd say. These aren't exactly spiders, they're Williams steppers, so you have a disc with fingers sticking off of it, and then a disc with rivets that receive the fingers as they wipe across. So the finger disc needs to be drilled and then a finger installed in different positions because they're not exactly 180 degrees separated. And what I'm doing is powering circuits as it rotates, and it needs to continuously have power on one side and have a feed from the other side in order to power that coil or that lamp. I have a little bit of wiring left to go on that, just simple things like running my 30-volt circuits or my 50-volt circuits to certain steppers in order to make certain things happen. I also, last time I tried it, had a short on the lamp circuit, so I need to find that and correct it wherever that is. My cardboard prototype light board might have failed in some way or another, and perhaps a socket has fallen down and is touching something that it shouldn't and is causing the short. I really don't know, because I haven't had a chance to be in that game very much since the last time I mentioned I was working on it. So hopefully soon I'll have an update there. I would like to get that game rolling without the hand wheels and then get those installed, make sure that all functions. In other news, I've got 2 other unannounced projects which I'm working towards, and I will let you know more on those. One is EM and one is not, but I'll let you know more as I am able to do so. But things are very exciting, and as you might have noticed, I never really slow down. So I've got plenty of plans and plenty of exciting things that I plan to do here in the upcoming year, and hopefully I can make some of them happen at least. Multi-races is close enough that it should be playable here before long, and RoboFrenzy should be in a similar situation before too much longer. So hopefully those will be heading towards polish soon, and then it will be a matter of building a second RoboFrenzy for Ryan Clater and working on some of these unannounced projects. In other news, Ava, my eldest daughter, is spending a lot of time down in the game room with me. I have spent the majority of the past 2 weekends working to devise some kind of system for hanging the multi-bingo playfields on the wall so that, first of all, they're protected up off the floor, and secondly, that it's still easy to pull them down and switch them in the game should I need to do that. So with design help from my wife, I managed to get the playfields up on the wall, and it's great. I mean, I can go and pull any playfield that I choose. They're tucked away in a spot up on the wall, like I mentioned, where they can come to no harm, and especially from me, accidentally jostling them or having to move them. Essentially, they were stacked in front of my toolbox, which was a bit problematic. My toolbox contains all the rubber and bulbs and everything that I use, so it became very difficult to do any work on my games because I would have to move this entire stack of playfields in an area that was very small. But now they're up on the wall. I got rid of some furniture, opened up the room a bit, and my daughter decided, pinball, pretty awesome. So she's been able to come down and play pretty much every night, and that's been wonderful. I mean, it's been great. We play together. She plays by herself, and I'm getting a lot of wiring done. I mean, it's very enjoyable. So I'm having a good time, and I hope she is too. Well, let's talk about this week's game. It's 1959's Gottlieb Straight Shooter. Straight Shooter is a wood rail, and it has 4 flippers. It's a Western-themed game, and the goal of the game is to, of course, get special by advancing different arrows on the playfield, and depending on which one is selected, based on the rollover that you hit, you can advance the arrows all the way to the end, which will light special. There's multiple ways to win on this game, as with many wood rails, especially of this era and before. You can either advance an arrow to the end and light special, or you can light multiple arrows in a row and receive a replay, or you can win on score. And lastly, you can get a replay by match. So let's talk about the playfield layout, because it's fairly interesting for a couple of reasons. As you shoot the ball, there's an array of bumpers up at the top. There's 2 pops on the left and right, and then up at the top center, you have 2 passive bumpers. As the ball travels down, it hits a circular arrangement of roll-under gates. There's 3 of them, and they're arranged just like they are in Tropic Isle or Moonshot, if you're a Bally aficionado. And down below, you have a center bank of targets. There are 3 stand-ups, each color-coded to match the playfield insert or hat down below in each of the arrows. And there's 5 arrows. Now, 2 each are for each letter. So you have 2 for A, and then you have 2 for B. However, one of the ones for B is one of the arrows for A. So you have essentially a top arrow that is purely A. The next arrow is shared with A and B. The next arrow is shared with B and C. The next with C and D. And the final arrow is D only. And again, if you get the arrow advanced all the way to the right side for 3 in a row, you get a replay. Now, up at the top, near those roll-under gates, are 2 very interesting flippers. They're mounted on the left and right side, beside a rollover on either side. But these flippers are aligned sideways, parallel to the side of the game. They're not angled in any way whatsoever. This is pretty cool, I think. It's a very unique way to arrange these flippers, and should allow some interesting action through those gates, assuming that you've got reasonable aim. On the back of that target bank, there are diagonal rubbers set up, so with good nudging skills, you can get it back onto the flipper and then flip it back through those roll-under gates. I think it's very clever, this layout, and looks like a lot of fun. Now, this is one, you've heard me say this quite a lot recently here, but this is a game that I haven't had the ability to play myself, but it's one that I would love to play. It was designed by Wayne Nyens, and the art was by Roy Parker. Aside from the other features I mentioned, down below the arrows, you have 2 slingshots and 2 flippers, and a rollover button between them that awards you 100,000 points every time you hit it. This game has the visible balls played in the apron, which I always thought was a very cool feature. As each ball drains, you can see it stack up at the bottom there, and then when you start a new game, a gate lifts and the balls can go over to the lifter area. So you can see, I've played 1 ball, 2 balls, 3 balls, and kind of track your progress through the game. Very fun. For the artwork, this is what I consider pretty classic Roy Parker. There is a woman dressed as a cow person, and she's riding on a horse, and she's holding a 6-shooter, and she's holding that gun up in the air towards the title, Gottlieb Straight Shooter. Same woman is on the playfield, holding up her gun, getting ready to aim over towards the right of the playfield, in the same direction that the arrows are pointing. Most of the playfield is blue, like the sky. I think it's just a very attractive art package. And the slingshots have a little joke, like Roy Parker likes to put in his artwork. There are bottles lined up on a fence, and one of them is being smashed by a bullet. And there's a bird that happens to be flying by with a very puzzled expression on its face and a question mark coming out of its head. This is one of only a few games that Gottlieb produced with a rating system, which is built into the back glass. It goes fair, good, excellent, super, and genius. I can only name a couple other games off the top of my head that have that, but I know that only a very few ran with that experiment. That's something that I've enjoyed about games from the 30s, especially. There can be a rating system on the scorecards, and if you hit a certain threshold, I'm sure you could turn that in for either payment or booze, depending on where you were and what the deal was. But anyway, I've always liked the rating system. I think it's kind of cool and a good way to track your progress. I like that the game actually tells you how well you've done, because score is arbitrary. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'm a replay kind of guy, and so I know if I'm doing well, if I'm making that machine fire off like a machine gun with all the knockers going off, but getting a really high score doesn't do a whole lot for me. It's still fun, of course, just has no lasting value, if you know what I mean. At any rate, that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for listening. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to me on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts via RSS, on Google Play Music, on Spotify, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast. And if you can't get enough of me, you can hear me talk about video games on the podcast Gaming on 10. That's gamingon10.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.